Welcome to Green Corridors, Tune into Nature, the podcast where we explore the deep ties between people and the natural world. In today's episode, we're stepping through time in the city of York, where the ancient city walls and historic churches offer a unique perspective on how humans have connected with both the land and their surroundings. The city walls have long served as a physical boundary, but also as a connection to the natural landscape that has shaped this city for centuries. Meanwhile, York's churches stand as landmarks in a city steeped in history, offering glimpses into how architecture and nature have intertwined through the ages. How have these structures influenced the way people interact with nature? And as we look to the future, how can we continue to build these connections? We are your hosts, Beki and Gillian, and today we're joined by Liam and Andrew, two people with a deep love for both history and nature. They believe that these historic monuments link us to the natural world and the stories it has carried throughout the ages. Join us as we explore the evolving relationship between history, nature, and the spaces we inhabit.
Thank you. Thank you both for coming. This is so interesting. It's very close to home. So, Andrew, can you tell us a bit about you and your interest in.
Yeah, I'll take you right back to my earliest interest, which would be as early as I can remember going to nature reserves or visiting heritage sites with my parents and going on fungus forays and things like that, bird watching, as well as visiting castles and various historic sites, country houses. So I remember doing a lot of that as a child, and both have been an interest to me. So I quite like this theme of talking about both my interests, natural heritage and the built heritage. And I was actually also not on a podcast, but on a radio interview when I was, I think, about 10, which was so, and that was quite interesting. How I was talking about a recently built pond at our school and some recently grown trees. We tried to make little copse, and that was quite exciting because that was the beginning of something that was a bit more engaging with nature rather than just having a playing field, and that was really quite nice. And then more recently, I grew up in York for a bit, Haxby to be accurate, and then moved to the Norfolk Broads, and very rich natural history there. Rare things like bitterns and swallowtail butterflies, and they really captured my imagination. And swallowtail butterflies, if you don't know what they look like, I should have brought a picture with me, but it's worth looking them up. They're big as well. I think they're the UK's biggest butterfly. And they have very particular needs, a bit like tansy beetle in York. They have very particular plants. I think it's milkwort, I think it's called, that they eat as their primary source of food.
They're only in the Norfolk Broads as well, aren't they? Is that correct?
I believe so.
In the UK, I know they're.
Yeah, because the bitterns were the same, but I think the bitterns have started to spread now because they're now found in other places.
Yeah, I think we've got them in Wheldrake, I think.
Yeah, okay.
I think.
It's quite exciting, isn't it, really?
It's really exciting.
It's a good news story of all these things about nature dwindling and bird populations plummeting, so it's nice to have a good news story.
It is.
And then, bring it right up to date. I volunteer for the Church Conservation Trust at Holy Trinity Gate, and we're trying to make that space a good space for part of this Green Corridors network in York. And we're working quite hard in the last year or so, made a significant difference to how we're managing that churchyard and managing it in a way that's helpful to wildlife. Not just make it a pretty garden, but making it useful for wildlife.
And it is, it's beautiful. And actually sitting in it is beautiful as well. It's a really lovely place to go. Lots of people go and sit on their lunch break, don't they, and enjoy it.
Absolutely, yeah.
It's really lovely.
Thank you.
Thank you. Liam.
Hi, I'm Liam Dennis, and I'm the Ancient Monuments Manager for the City of York Council. It's a role I've been in for about a year and a half at this point. I've been with CYC for nearly 15 years now. A bit of an eclectic set of jobs. I worked with the communities team, which is how I know Beki. I've worked in the public realm team, so there's a connection with horticulture and nature there. Is how I started my career at CYC. I'd come straight out of uni where I'd done an archaeology degree, which it turns out not as much fun as it looks on Time Team. So I was never going to be a trowel-wielding archaeologist, unfortunately. So that was disappointing, but I've always loved heritage, especially the built heritage. I spent 2 years as an assistant stonemason, so working on Fountains Abbey which was a fantastic opportunity. It's a great thing to do. And pulling it all together as the Ancient Monuments Manager for the council seemed to all make sense. So I look after the city walls mainly, which includes the ramparts, which are a fantastic ecological resource for the city and have been for hundreds of years now.
And how do you think people, like, that's how you've connected with the built heritage that we have and the natural heritage, but do you think other people connect in a similar way?
For the walls, I think it's such an iconic part of the city. I think for residents, there's a real sense of connection with them. They've seen them every day. Quite a few people use them as a daily commuter route to just go around the city. I have quite a few people tell me that they're their happy place, that they stand and they walk the walls on a beautiful sunny day, and I must admit it's one of mine as well. And so it's such a fantastic privilege to be able to look after them. So I think the residents of York have a real personal connection with the walls and the ramparts. And this time of year with the daffodils out, I think that's such an iconic view of the city and such a landmark that people from all over the world come and see, and residents are very protective of their daffodils, rightly so.
Yeah, I was a bit sniffy about daffodils, but we were on one of the corridors on Sunday clearing some single stem bramble, so it was fine because there was no nesting birds. And underneath were loads of daffodils. And once we cleared all the single stem bramble back, the daffodils were amazing. And as you come into York, I was thinking that's like your entry in, and then you get to the city walls and it's full of daffodils, and it was really beautiful. It was really beautiful. Yeah. And Andrew, people spend a lot of time in Holy Trinity, don't they?
Yeah, I'd say people have the same passion for spending time in our churchyard and in our church, and we get feedback all the time. It's really appreciative, and people saying how nice it is to either, as you said before, spend time in the garden or the churchyard, or just spend some time in the church. And we get many, many repeat visitors, or people discover us after living in York for several decades and suddenly discover it and are surprised to have missed it.
Yeah, it is a little. Have you been?
I have been, yeah, but it's a little bit of a hidden gem, isn't it?
Yeah, and talk about daffodils. We've got some the narcissus, the small daffodils. We've got a few of those, and we've planted up a few borders just recently to give it a bit more colour. But there's a good range of smaller sort of, I guess they've spread wildflowers. I think we've got aconites, celandines, I think, as well. Definitely have crocuses. So you've got a good mix of things coming through.
Nice. And when you were saying, Liam, about looking after the walls, that's not just the maintenance of it, is it? It's the natural. How am I going to describe that? The banks, not the grassy banks.
The ramparts.
The ramparts, yeah.
So we look after the ecology of the ramparts as well, which are a fantastic resource in the middle of the city. So they cover sort of nearly 2 miles worth of green space that encircles the city centre, which is really unique, and is a fantastic resource and habitat that's really important in our city centre. They can link up quite a few of those other green lungs that come into the city, whether it's down the river or down some of the moorlands that come in, and they are really important for the city centre, and we're becoming even more conscious of the important role they have to play and what changes we can make to encourage sort of biodiversity and good habitats for our mammals and our insects.
What have they looked like in the past?
So the banks as you see them now are mostly a product of Victorian clearance. In the 1830s, 1840s, there was a real push to improve the city walls. That's both the physical monument, so you'll see quite a few Victorian additions, sort of little pepper pot bartizans on the corner of towers and that kind of thing. A pepper pot bartizan, it's a little tiny circular turret sort of sat on the corners of things. So they're all Victorian fantasies, making it a little bit like a medieval Disneyland for them. And at the same time, they did a lot of clearing of banks and that kind of thing. So the steep sides that are mostly clear of shrubs is because of their actions. If we're going back historically, They've been used for a variety of different things. Obviously, defence, as why the walls, one of the main reasons the walls were created. But also they've had a really important role sort of grazing throughout the historic period. The city corporation used to lease grazing rights along the city walls. So you'll see lots of historic images of sheep, goats, cows grazing the city walls, which is really nice. And also there's a really important domestic use of those ramparts and those banks. I think they've probably spent more time hanging out and drying laundry than they ever have repelling invaders, because there's wonderful images of sort of that domestic interplay as laundry is being dried and people are just doing their day-to-day lives in the rampart and in the ditch of the city walls.
Fascinating, isn't it?
Yeah.
I would, love to see them go back to being used to hang laundry out.
in amongst the wildflowers that you've got going.
Sure, yeah. You can get a bit of colour going there.
Yeah.
Nice,
yeah. And was Holy Trinity always sort of...
I think the churchyard, fairly sure churchyard was bigger, and it's been encroached upon. That's quite common in urban churchyards. Most of them have been shrunk in size. I think the size of the churchyard at All Saints Pavement is significantly smaller than it would have been. You've only got a little bit to the east end. There's a bit of grass there as you can cut through to go on to Coppergate Centre. There's a little bit of grass there. In recent history, there hasn't been a lot of change with that churchyard, because on one side we've got some properties that date from, if I get this right, I might get this wrong, 1360, I think, or so thereabouts. So that's been unchanged for quite a while. And then the other sides, particularly on the Petergate side, they're very new buildings.
So that the 14th century ones would be the Minster. What would it be? What are they? Yeah, what is?
Oh yeah, okay. So it's Lady Row's the name of the row of. What there would have been shops. So there would have always been shops, and above that there would have been accommodation, and they were built by, as we understand it, the Home family. So that's an anglicised of the Home family. So they were the Home family, and they built them to gain rents that they would then use to pay for priests to say mass for the family. So build a church chapel. So if you go to Holy Trinity, you've also got the church chapel, which is from the outside, it looks like it's a bit jutting out of the main church because it's an addition to the church. So the church itself and those buildings are very interconnected because they were built for the purpose of supporting the building and employment of priests within that chapel.
Fascinating, isn't it?
No idea.
I didn't know that. That's
Yeah.
so much that we don't know about the history that surrounds us, I suppose. But churchyards themselves, because they're protected spaces, I
I
suppose.
think, are they?
Well, I think a lot of them will still be consecrated spaces. So they're places that you can't really do anything with them because they are still consecrated as graveyards. So.
Which is a really good thing because they end up amazing habitats, don't they?
Yeah. As I was saying, some of them have shrunk down in size, but if they've got graves in them, and some of them have been used quite recently, but most of the urban churchyards were disused in Victorian times, and York Cemetery became the place where everyone was buried, and it was because of things like cholera.
Right.
And so churchyards then became a lot more left to nature. So,
and in fact, a lot of our Green Corridors work, there's a lot of churches. So the city walls is a big part of it. 'Cause I had no idea there were two. I should have known they're 2 miles long, but I didn't. But a lot of the churches have are doing their best to improve their green area, their land for wildlife to increase biodiversity. A lot of churches have come into the Green Corridors. Well, not come into it, but they're doing their thing to connect habitats to wildlife. So it's really cool.
yeah.
Yeah. And so the work that you're doing on the walls, what can you tell us a bit more about that, Liam?
So at the minute we have our York Walls in Bloom project, which brings together a few sort of disparate little projects that were going on around the city walls, all with the aim of keeping them a fantastic looking setting to the city, which is really important, as well as increasing their ecology value, biodiversity, habitat values, as well as trying to improve the sustainability of our management and maintenance regimes as well. I think everyone's aware of the need to reduce the amount of carbon we spend undertaking various activities, one of which being horticulture maintenance, and to try and do that in a way that keeps the city walls looking fantastic and being a brilliant habitat for animals.
So what would it look like? What do you want it to look like?
Ideally, not a great deal different to what it does at the minute. I'd love to be able to introduce a wider variety of species across the city banks. At the minute, most of the steep sections are dominated by tussock grasses, which, while fantastic from a conservation point of view, they have a really important role in managing the water content of the soil, of managing the thermal dynamics of that bank, because effectively it is a bit of a wall precariously balanced on a muddy hill, with not fantastic foundations throughout the most of it. So making sure that rampart is stable and is well cared for is as important as looking after the actual masonry elements when it comes to making sure that wall stands. And the ecology and the plants have a really important role to play on that. So while they might not look the most attractive plant, the tussock grass is a really important feature of the rampart, as much for the conservation as it is for the ecology. But we would like to introduce more plants, more flowering plants, to add that bit of visual interest, as well as something for pollinators to improve the habitat structure of that area as well. So on the steep banks, it's very much a careful management of what we introduce while maintaining the structure of the ramparts. In the flatter areas, where there used to be the ditch in front, we have a few more options. At the minute, they're cut quite regularly, and they're quite short and lawn-like, which is great for moving around the city walls, but I think there's more things we can do to add visual interest. So at Red Tower over the summer, we're working with the Green Corridors project with St Nick's to introduce a new flower bed, effectively. We're going to be importing nutrient-poor soil in a method that's been used at the Tower of London to great effect. And in that, we're going to be planting a traditional wildflower mix, British wildflower mix mainly, perennial species, to develop a really robust habitat structure. So that'll be going in this year, and then 2026 is when that habitat will have really established and it'll be looking its best. Other areas of the city walls, so Station Rise opposite the Grand Hotel, we're trying a slightly different approach, more visually stunning, because that is probably the Instagram shot of the city, off the city walls down over to the Minster. So that's a really key vista for us. Traditionally, since the 1920s, it's been planted up in a classic amenities style, with bedding plants going in twice a year, which is obviously a huge investment in both money and resources to grow and propagate those plants, and then plant them and then water them. And in the face of more extreme weather, even in 2022, when we had that really big heat wave over the summer, despite our best efforts of trying to water those bedding plants twice a day, they still sadly didn't make it. So I think there's a growing consensus that we need to adapt our management methods to make them more resilient. So along those lines, we've stripped out the grasses that predominated the area, and we're going to replace them with a sort of floral mix of predominantly non-native annuals. First off, again, because they're showier, they're going to have a real strong visual appeal, which is important on that site. It'll start the process of denutrifying the soil so that we can introduce more annual species, more native species, to adjust the balance towards a sustainable and ecologically friendly planting display. That's going to be really carefully managed over the coming years as we see how that site develops.
Yeah. So you've both just described your connection with the places that you look after and how they've evolved over the time that you've been there, and how they've evolved out through history, really. But it's quite interesting, isn't it? How I don't know, how would it... But you're invested in it as well. Do you think the people that would have looked after them in the past were invested in that natural environment in the same way?
Yeah, I think with churchyards, it's gone through a varied throughout time, but certainly when they were working as churchyards, as burial grounds, they would have been managed in a different way because the focus then was functional, whereas later on they became, I guess, more like follies because they were not being used for burials, but there were nice spaces in an increasingly urban space. And now churchyards in some cities are the only green spaces in the city. So they're quite valuable to us, but from a different perspective. I'm not too sure how much nature would have really been considered when they were, because they would have been functional as other spaces as well. There's a lot of debris that's been chucked in there, so it would have been used for other purposes, not just burials. But I think there would have been quite important spaces going back in history. I think in medieval times they were quite multi-use spaces.
That's interesting, actually, because a lot of our green sites across the city were rubbish tips.
Yeah.
So it is a different connection to nature. Do you think our connection to nature has evolved?
I think our connection to the city walls has evolved recently, but even going back to the turn of the 20th century, we have a document from the last resident of Micklegate Bow, actually, Harry Sowden, who wrote a naturalist's guide to the city walls, and he spent 5 years essentially going around the city walls, cataloguing what he could see and all of the plants he could see. And in his opening paragraphs, he talks about how you don't need to go out into the countryside to find ecology, to do natural sciences, that it can just be on your doorstep. So I think there is a sort of a historic legacy that stretches back further of natural history, and especially urban natural history, which is fantastic.
I hadn't even heard of that. You were nodding. Have you heard of that book?
No, but I understand the principle of it's quite interesting, because there's quite a few enthusiasts both in heritage and natural history that I guess have been quite pioneering and recording things and taking a deeper interest in just what's about around us, really. The Friends group at Holy Trinity was formed to look after the church at a time when there wasn't so much interest, and there was a risk of it falling to ruin at one time. So yeah, with the natural history, people showing an interest in what's there was really important for conservation and knowing what's there and how we need to protect it.
So moving away from the functionality to appreciation of what's there.
Yeah.
And it's a lot of our places are so reliant on volunteers, and we're very lucky in the city, actually, aren't we?
Yeah.
I think we're lucky that so many people are passionate about these spaces and they care deeply, because it is that connection to York, isn't it? Like, you can't really live in York without caring about the city walls, without caring about these amazing churches that we have here.
And people York residents get quite passionate about the changes, don't they?
They do. Yeah. I think rightly so, that they feel they have that connection and they have that stewardship over the city walls. It was in large part public interest, which stopped us knocking them down in the start of the 19th century.
Wow, really?
I didn't even realise that was considered.
In 1799, there was a petition put before Parliament from the then unelected York Corporation to have them removed as an eyesore and as a barrier to growth and the development of the city. So about that time, you've seen lots of cities losing their city walls. So London, the end of the 18th century, had the last remains of their city walls removed. And we'll do the same to ours. We did lose some chunks, luckily not too much. A couple of the posterns down near Bale Hill and on Layerthorpe. We obviously lost the chunk near St Leonard's Place next to Booth and Bar, where there's that bit missing, and we lost most of the Barbicans themselves, those bits that stick out of the front. So if you look at Wormgate Bar, it's about the last surviving Barbican, at least in the UK. I might be right in saying Europe, but on the whole, the residents did come together and successfully save our city walls, which I think we're all really grateful for.
Really grateful, yeah.
It's people power fire.
Yeah.
It's good.
I know it's good that we've got such passionate people who are so interested. We have the Friends of York Walls, who are a volunteer organisation who help and support our conservation of the city walls and really get involved. They are also particularly interested in the ecology. So there's a little section next to Fishergate Boston Tower, near the big Wetherspoons in town.
Yep.
And they've spent a couple of years doing a bit of an experiment as to what plants and what management processes that we could use to improve the biodiversity. So what plants can outcompete the tusky grass, what they need to help them establish and then thrive. This year is sort of the final year of their experiment, and they'll come back to us with their findings, and hopefully those will inform what we plant and how we plant going forward.
It's really good hearing all of this, because I think some people might assume that there's no thought going into what's going on the city walls, or no thought going into managing an area to increase biodiversity. I'm not going to say rewilding, because it isn't any of that. It's bringing things to a state for nature, and enhancing areas for nature, because so much thought has gone into what you're both doing.
I think it's really easy to see a patch of land that's mown twice a week and the investment that's made in that space, and equate that investment to care, because it's a really obvious sign that somebody's looking at it. So one of the things that we're trying to do is prove that we still care. Is that actually the changes we make are because we care and because we want to improve the space and make sure that it's conserved for future generations. And that we all know there's going to be challenges ahead, financial challenges, environmental challenges. And the changes we make now will hopefully limit those quite a lot. And that's as much the ecology as it is the actual stonework of the city walls.
Yeah, it's really interesting. Do you come up against anything, Andrew, when looking in the church? Or, like if you certainly one of the churches that we are. I don't know what the word is, because they're part of the corridor, but they do all the stuff themselves. We don't go and do anything. They look after the wildlife themselves, and it's amazing. So they're part of the Green Corridor on the River Foss, and their churchyard is so beautiful. But they would come up against challenges, because people would assume that because there was an area of tussocky grass with some wildflowers in, that it wasn't cared for, and it was far from that.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I'm thinking to when I lived in Norfolk, and we had a churchyard with, I guess half of it was still a graveyard, and the other half was a graveyard but not used anymore, so it was disused graveyard. And the grass was left to grow because of the diversity of various plants and flowers that come up. And there were certain times of the year when we cut it, so the grass wasn't out competing the natural, the wildflowers, and that would have looked quite scruffy because it was left to grow in its wild state for a lot of the year. And I think there is that quite common perception that if it's mown grass, it's maintained, and if it isn't, it's not.
It's a hangover from the Victorian age where nature had to be tidy and beautiful, isn't it? And these days we appreciate that that's not necessarily the case.
Yeah, the sort of the evolving landscape of the city walls. I mean, you can look back at the 18th century sort of picturesque movement, local artists like Halfpenny who took lots of early photos of the city walls, and they're all overgrown, and it's that sense of discovery, that sense of slightly lost world of what's this ruin with a tree growing out of it. And then we move away from that to a Victorian tidying up aesthetic, and then into the early 20th century, that amenity planting, that English heritage look of walls that are sort of perfectly lined and covered in cement, and the grass is 2 millimeters high and perfectly boxed up around the side.
Capability Brown?
A bit later than him. And I think we're moving back towards this idea of a balance. One of the things that I'm hoping to try on the city walls is what's called soft capping. If you go behind the library where Anglian Tower is, you'll see we've done a bit of an experiment in 2022 where we put on some turf effectively on top of the wall to try and protect it, where they would usually have just a cement render. And the idea there very much about managing water ingress, about managing the thermal effects of frost shattering and heat cracking on the tops of city walls. I'm actually just writing my dissertation on the effects of that and how successful it's been. And if it turns out that it's been quite successful, we'll look at whether we can expand that to other areas of unconsolidated masonry across the city walls, and also what ecological benefits that has alongside it, where we've replaced effectively just a concrete shell over a wall with this natural plant carpet, and see what plants have thrived, what we can add to, again, just build that biodiversity and give the tiny wins across little sites. It doesn't have to be on a grand scale that you can get those wins for nature. There can be just pockets of green space that can make a huge difference for plants and animals as they try and move around a city.
I feel like you've both found exactly where you need to be, because the way you're describing things, it's not just about, you're not just looking at the wall, you're looking at the wall and where it sits within nature, and how the ramparts affect, and how the grass supports that structure. And with you, because I know you're in the church as well as outside of the church, and increasing the biodiversity outside and the social aspect of it. It feels like when you're talking, both of you are exactly where you need to be, where you're at this time. Who knows for the future, but where you need to be. It's really interesting.
Yeah.
And socially, because you're, I know we're going to talk about books later, but the books you've brought in are about foraging and food, aren't they?
It's I think some of them are quite political, actually, because they're describing the situation with the food as being an industry. If you go back to, probably not that far back, but further you go back, it's more, you're going back towards that foraging and hunter-gathering lifestyle, or that way of life, I suppose. And this is how we've become disconnected with the natural world, and our food comes to us and we don't have to go out and find it. And one of those books is really talking about how that's led to a bad diet, really, and how it's not that healthy for us. And veering away from nature has meant that our lifestyles in general are just so disconnected, and in many ways it's bad for our health, bad for the environment.
That's been quite a concurrent theme, hasn't it, throughout?
Yeah, we've sort of built these constructs that separate us from nature, and what we used to know sort of intrinsically within us was the right thing to do. But yeah, it
seems throughout our podcast, doesn't it? But that's because even like I'm just thinking about that and the city walls, like how we used to put bedding plants in and just mow the grass, but not see the natural habitat as part of the wall. And what you've described is how you're finding ways to support both nature and this natural, this historic heritage. It's really quite a shift, isn't it? It's really interesting.
Yeah, I think there's a growing appreciation of the importance that ecology plays. Historic England put out advice notes about how we can prepare and adapt our monuments for a changing climate, and some of that's about physical adaptations to rainwater goods to be able to cope with increased levels of rainfall, and especially those kind of increased heavy rainfall events. But then as much to looking at, net zero and biodiversity. So there is, across the heritage conservation discipline, a real shift in ethos and thinking towards the importance of these sites, because quite often they're large, physically large spaces with a lot of green space around them that could play a really vital role in tackling climate change and in tackling our use of resources and improve sustainability.
Mm. I see that sort of that network within the city where Holy Trinity sits, with the Minster and the Refectory, and then we've got the museum gardens, and then the city walls. These are and then across the river there's All Saints. There's such a network, even though we're in an urban environment. These are so integral to, I don't know, to life, to me. So increasing biodiversity, supporting people, supporting nature, supporting well-being, having the way, you started by saying that's your happy place on the city walls. When I go into Holy Trinity, when I was working in a shop, that was my happy place, because I could hear birds, I could smell nature. It was just, I'd see that they're integral. And I don't know how to describe it. And then, how do you see it? The structure. How do you feel like Holy Trinity, for example? Because I know you do other things. You're not just there. But yes. Does it have the same challenges as the city walls? I don't know what I'm asking here.
I'd say no, because there is a... Well, if you go to Holy Trinity, you'll see there's a physical barrier between the church and churchyard of what they call a cordon sanitaire that goes round a gravel patch, which is supposed to be completely free from any plants. So there's a physical separation of the church and the churchyard, whereas what I'm hearing about the walls, you're trying to integrate them. And I think that's really interesting.
It is interesting. Why is that? What's it called? Sorry, the
cordon sanitaire.
Why is it there?
It's to stop any plants growing there that might do the opposite of what you're saying and sort of trap the moisture and cause degradation of the stones because of moisture being trapped there.
So is the cordon sanitaire, which sounds like...
I don't know whether there's a common English word for it. That's the
really
Latin.
Cool. So that's between the actual graveyard, as it would have been then, and which we'd probably call now a garden or grounds.
Yeah, it's
and the building.
Yeah.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
I see. And is that when did that come in?
Oh, well, that's a really good question. I think it's been a feature that goes way back. And certainly nowadays, we've been, to give it a bit of context, we've had a bit of a discussion about this, because we have a contract that comes and historically has put weed killer around that. And this is a volunteer team in the garden. They've said not to do that, but they said if we've got to demonstrate that we can maintain it to a level that's satisfactory to them, for not to reintroduce the use of weed killers again. So that's something that we're adopting as we're taking on. We've been given a challenge, really, because the conservation element seems to be paramount there.
Plants can be quite destructive for a building. Yeah. If you think about Budley as the bane of my life if it grows out of the city walls, they're a hardy woody plant with a really invasive root structure, and if they get embedded, they can cause a lot of damage to buildings. So there is a balance we have to meet between the plants we want to encourage and the plants that we don't want to encourage. And again, that use of weed killers and glyphosates is really important, that we look at how we not only encourage the plants that we do want within our historic environment, but discourage the plants that we don't want and that could cause damage.
And doing that manually is far better than doing it.
Yeah, so actually, as I say, we've got a challenge here to make sure we just got to demonstrate that we can maintain that.
Yeah.
And it relies on volunteers, so and we could do have a few more volunteers. We've had a bit of interest in the garden, but the gardening volunteer role is quite a new one. We've really focused on meet and greet in the church, for as far as I can remember.
But if people wanted to get involved in volunteering in the garden, how do they go about finding out about that?
Probably the easiest way is to pop in and visit us and have a chat with us. It's probably the best way. I'd say that's the number one way of doing it, really. I can give you some stuff to put in notes on contact details as well.
Yeah, that would be brilliant. Thank you. And what if people wanted to get involved?
So Friends of York Walls is a fantastic place to start. They're an organisation open to everybody, and they have lots of different interests across various aspects of heritage and conservation. And then we work with St Nick's and York Cares on specifically the ecologies and the Green Corridors project, and we're really thankful to them for all the work that they've done and the flack that they've sort of copped on our behalf as well sometimes.
It's worth it.
But again, we couldn't do it without our volunteers. And a massive thank you to all of them.
I think it's incredible foresight and really interested from you and your team. And I like to call you the Monuments Guys because I think that's very cool. I know that is your title though, isn't it? Monument Guy. But it's incredible foresight because it is looking at something very differently, confronting the challenges that you're faced with, because it is controversial, I suppose. But it's, obviously we're all about green corridors, so but trying to meet that compromise with increasing biodiversity, but also keeping the city beautiful, because we live in a beautiful city, and some areas do need to be mown, some areas, and we do need to look after some areas differently, but it seems like you've got a good...
Making that balance is really important. The visual aesthetic is paramount for the city and the city walls. It sets off all the rest of our heritage, all the rest of our beautiful city. So making sure that it looks right is really important, and making sure it looks right in a way that's sustainable and will be able to carry on for years. Yeah, we've changed in the past, and the city walls have always developed and shifted their look and their management practices to fit the needs of the time. So we're just sort of the next step along that line of history.
And it feels like that's the same for you, Andrew, really, because people visiting have an expectation maybe about how churchyards should be, but also having somewhere beautiful to be, as well as...
I think that's the interesting question, because I'm thinking of churchyards in more rural settings that were probably less visited, whereas when we talk about the urban settings, there is a bit of a higher expectation of them being maintained, especially when they're open as a public space and they've got benches and they're set up to be there as places people are going to use. And there is an expectation more so than, I say, the rural churchyards where you might not get many visitors there anyway.
But the visitors you do get in those situations have a real personal connection with the space, don't they? They're going there to pay respects, probably to see a loved one.
Yeah, that's true.
And I think there's from what the studying that I've done of churchyards, again becomes a really careful balance between that respect, and so that people can mourn a loved one, and the important space that they have, and obviously quite an emotional time if they turn up and it doesn't look cared for. That's a point in their life that they're potentially their most vulnerable, and that little thing of this doesn't look how I expected it to look can really be quite upsetting for them, I guess.
But I think you've shown that it can look beautiful in Holy Trinity. The work that you all do, it looks beautiful, and it does look. And I know it's different because people aren't going there in the same, often for the same reasons. But I feel like you've got that balance right. I don't know if you feel.
Yeah, I think so, and I think as I said, we're taking that a bit further and doing a bit more to encourage wildlife, because in the last few years we haven't made too much of an effort to be encouraging more wildlife. We've maintained it as is, but now we're building things like dead hedges, and that's great, because that's using debris that we have no use for anywhere else, and making it useful, and it's changing the feel of churchyard a little bit, because it's creating some zones. We've got a bit of a herb bed, and we're working on slightly different environments, and it's only a very small space. Managing that a bit more proactively it's interesting seeing it slowly evolve.
Have you noticed an increase in wildlife in there?
Well, recently, and I don't know if this is just coincidental, but we've seen evidence. Well, in fact, some of us have seen fox, at least a fox, maybe foxes. And I don't live in York. I'm out in Malton, but I'm assuming that foxes must be looking for green spaces in the city, and it's nice to think that they're using our space, because there's very little evidence of them causing any destruction or damage to the churchyard. They leave little traces of the fact they've been there, usually digging little holes. I think they were trying to dig up some bulbs previously, and that was how we knew they were there. And the Viking festival, and that was there. We have a Viking market for the Viking festival, and one of the tents that was put up, a fox managed to get inside the tent and left its little
calling card.
Yeah. Well, it left a little fox-shaped entrance under the canvas, and some foxy paw prints on the canvas. So it was very obvious it had been there.
Oh, nice.
And we're still looking for a belt buckle that was disappeared, and we haven't found it yet. The fox must have buried it somewhere in the churchyard, but it hasn't turned up yet.
Nice.
Fantastic. Now, I found it really fascinating, because maybe it's just my perception. I've always viewed these structures as static things, but hearing you two talk, it's clear that they've evolved and shifted over time. What do you see them becoming in the future?
Well, I can't see the city walls changing a great deal. Hopefully not too much. I think we could be doing more to make use of the spaces we do have, particularly the bars, to get access, to get people engaged with them and understanding them. I think looking at how we interpret the monument is going to be a challenge going forward, but a good challenge. I think digital interpretation is going to be really big. I'm a massive fan of VR interpretations, because I think that gives you the opportunity to reconstruct without actually touching the monument. So to go back and say, this is what we think the Roman city wall would look like, or this is what we think, the Anglo-Scandinavian city wall looks like, and to be able to peel back those layers of history, but in a way that doesn't physically affect the monument, because it has changed a lot over time. Buildings abutting it have gone up and come down. I mean, if you look at somewhere like St Leonard's, that was a huge medieval hospital that stretched from the little bit you can see on the edge of Museum Gardens now all the way across the library to the Theatre Royal. And there's only that one tiny little trace of it left. And so being able to experience that change in landscape, I think, is going to be really important, and I think that's going to be the main way that people, the main change that people will see as how they experience the city walls going forward, is that blending of digital interpretation with the physical heritage that we've got.
I think that's really, I'd be so excited. It'd be really nice to see where Holy Trinity sat, with, you said there were shops in front of it before, but having that opportunity to see, because I had no idea how big St Leonard's Hospital was. I knew it was there, but I didn't know how big it was. But and we always assume we know what things look like, but being able to recreate what we think it might have looked like, because we're never going to really know. Like, how did it get built? Who built them? Where did they get the stone from? It's all really... I know you probably know all of that, but I don't. I don't know.
Probably up views on a barge, but no, it's the change and evolving landscape is a really key part of our heritage, and hopefully it would give people an understanding of this building as more than a city defence. It's spent a disproportionately small amount of its time actually repelling invaders, and more of its time with people living in it and on it and around it, as a symbol of economic and social control, of controlling the economy of the city and who comes in and what merchants come in and what we sell and where that money goes to. And I think exploring themes like that and exploring themes of the domestic use is going to be really exciting.
Really,
if I ever get time to do it.
Yeah, really exciting. And knowing how was Holy Trinity always a really important church? Was it? Do you know?
That's a really difficult question to answer. There were, I think, mid-40s, say 43 churches, something like that. We can't give an exact number anyway, I don't think, but within the city walls. And they all served quite a small area. So Gudrun Gate was a parish. And then you move along King's Square, there would have been a church there, and that would have been another parish church. And it's almost a street church. And yeah, to the people that went to that particular church, it would have been quite important to them. And there's certain, I suppose there's little indications of how important it was were with some of the legacies that were left. A connection, I suppose, well, I was talking about food, but with materials we used for clothing, the cloth trade was a big trade, and money was used from the cloth trade to build churches and establish churches through the guilds. And in Holy Trinity, our east window, the main benefactor was a cloth merchant. He was then rector at Holy Trinity. And this is in the 1470s, and the installation of that window was mainly because of the cloth industry giving him the funds to be able to afford to, leave that legacy.
It wasn't. Is that there was a woman that left some money as well? Wasn't
Yeah,
there?
yeah. That's a nice one to mention. Jane Wright, Miss Jane Wright. The Jane Wright Trust, who I don't know a huge amount, are still an active charity in York, and it was established as a charity on the back of her will, which was, now I won't get the date right, but it's late 1600s, and she left over £1,700, so an extraordinary amount of money. Her will intended to leave £1,000, but she obviously had more funds available when it was finally proved. So yeah, in excess of £1,700 to buy land and property, of which the profits would help the poor in various ways of Gudrun Gate Parish. Nowadays, it helps York residents across York.
Still, that's
so they have a hardship fund, they have social housing. Apparently there's a fund that supports students at York College. So they're still doing similar things to the original aims, just with a modern relevance. Yeah, I'll mention something I was going to mention just because it links in with that sort of theme I've been mentioning of our disconnect and how much York would have been a very marshy area, and it's very much overlooked that fact now because it's so urbanised and so many hard surfaces everywhere. And you mentioned Layerthorpe earlier, that was or marshy area that going outside of York. And I think it's interesting how that natural environment, I guess, is still shows its evidence because it's a place that floods quite a lot because it's such a moist reservoir of water, even though we've covered it over in hard surfaces.
Yeah.
A lot of people think that's a section of city wall that we've lost between where you get off at Layerthorpe Poston and rejoin the city walls at Red Tower, but now that was the King's Fish Pond. William the Conqueror dammed the foss there and flooded it and created that side of the defence for the city and the moat for Clifford's Tower.
Interesting.
Wow. The environment we see today is very, very different from what historically you could expect. And I think that area of the city, having been marshy as far back as prehistory, would have been a really important focal point for early Britons.
Yes, I think so.
I think we've got evidence of hunter-gathering in the area and seasonal use, which is fantastic, but again, entirely masked by our modern foss rivers and drainage ditches.
Gosh, it's just so interesting how we just think something, like in my head that's always been like that, obviously, because that's all I've known. But it'd be so fascinating to see. I had no idea.
But I think, didn't the marshiness of it have something to do with the success of the Battle of Fulford as well? Yeah,
so that's been a really important part of the city defences and how we've protected our city for years. So we've always been quite a marshy, wet city, and we've used that to our advantage in a variety of different ways. The reasons that the Romans established their legionary fortress here was because it was the high point over a lowland marshy area where they could get ships up the Humber to resupply, but control a space around it and have it easily defended. So nature has shaped our city as much as we've shaped it.
Yeah, that's so interesting.
But no, thank you both. It's been really
being here.
Yeah,
it's a pleasure. Thank you very much for having us on.
Learned so much that I had no idea about. It's been really nice. Yeah,
it's been a history lesson for both of us.
Oh, if I can just plug the donations for the city walls, it's hopefully something that we'll be trialling after Easter. So anybody who's interested in donation for the upkeep of the city walls, which also includes the York Walls in Bloom and the ecology work that we're doing, if you could just go to york.gov.uk/city walls, and you should be able to find a link to our donations page, and anything that you donate is really greatly appreciated.